Today I'm going to be building the Zoom65 sent to me from Wuku Studio. It came in a box with a lot of goodies and accessories, so I'll jump right into the unboxing. Right away after opening it, the weight that goes on the bottom of the case was packaged separately in another box, which I'll get into shortly. Next was an instruction manual for assembly, then a high-quality zip-up faux suede case that included everything else needed to build the keyboard. The first package inside contained all of the Poron foam mods, such as the gasket strips, case foam, switch foam, plate foam, and the PCB foam. I was sent the wireless version of the Zoom65, so there was also a small envelope with the battery. In the bottom of the zip-up case was the keyboard itself, wrapped up in a custom plastic sleeve. I chose the faint blurple colorway, and it features an aluminum top and bottom with a rotary knob slot built in, as well as a USB-C port located in the center. It also has a space on the bottom to insert and secure the weight. As you can tell by the gaskets I showed a moment ago, this is a gasket-mounted keyboard. The accessories were also tucked into the case, such as the adhesive feet, screws and standoffs, and stabilizers. In the top compartment of the case was a black coiled USB-C cable, a knob, the Hotswap PCB, and the polycarbonate plate. Now that I've gone through the zip-up case, I'll go ahead and open up the weight. It was packed up in protective foam along with the screws for it. I went with the pink anodized aluminum weight. The quality of this weight is really nice, and the engraved detail is crisp too. I'm really impressed with this kit so far and how well it was packaged overall. To begin this build, I put down my pink American Haptics work mat, which you can get 5% off using my code MOCHI. First, I brought out the PCB and opened up the plastic packaging. I want to plug it in and test it out to make sure it's in good working order before I begin the build. Because this is a wireless PCB, it needs some power, so I brought out the battery and temporarily hooked it up just for this test. Then I plugged in a USB-C cable and connected it to my MacBook. I know everything is hooked up correctly since the green light has turned on the bottom of the PCB. I brought out my pink fine-tip tweezers from Stationery Stash, opened up Via's key tester, and touched it to each Hotswap socket. Everything is working just fine, so I unplugged everything and put the battery away. Before I continue, I want to note that I made a bit of a mistake with the order of things and ended up installing the stabilizers before adding the switch foam sheet. I'll be sure to note the mistake as I go, but I also want to mention that I also added stab mats as well, not even considering the fact that I'll be using a switch foam sheet to absorb the sound of the stabs anyway. Regardless, I do like the end result still, which I'll be discussing at the end of the video. For stabilizers, I won't be using the ones that came with the keyboard kit. Instead, I'm using pink TX stabilizers sent to me from PK Keyboards. You can get 5% off of these stabs too by using my code MOCHI. These are meant to match Alpaca switches perfectly, which I'll actually be using for this build, and they also happen to match my keycaps very well too. This kit is for the 6.25 unit spacebar, and I'll be using 3 of the 1 unit wires for this build. I want to go ahead and lube them as well, so I brought out my switch keys brush kit and pulled out a brush and 205G0, as well as my Kinetic Labs lube palette. I'm only going to be lubing the housings for now, and I'll be using my grease syringe kit for the wires later on while I'm adding keycaps, so I can test out the specific keycaps with them and fine-tune how they sound and feel. Here's how they look after assembly. I also decided to grab the stabilizer pads in the stab kit that came with the keyboard because the TX stabs don't come with them, and I want to minimize the sound of the stem hitting the PCB just a bit. I used my fine-tip tweezers to apply them. Then I added my stabilizers to the PCB. These are PCB mounted and just clip right in and don't require any screws. I also added the stabilizer poppers, which match the pink stem color to help prevent wire dropout. As you can see, I'll be going with an ISO layout, which this PCB does support. Here's how the stabilizers look after installation, and here they are next to an Alpaca switch. The colors match very well, and I'm so glad I received these in time for this build. Next, I removed the polycarbonate plate from the protective sleeve and brought out the standoffs. I screwed them onto the backside of the plate using the photo reference in the instruction manual. Then I laid the plate foam onto the same side as the standoffs. As I noted earlier, I definitely forgot to add the switch foam sheet, so I had to remove the stabilizers I installed a moment ago. Since these are TX stabs, it was a lot less time consuming to remove compared to traditional screw-in stabs, and all I had to do was remove the pink stopper with my fine-tip tweezers. Then I squeezed the part of the housing sticking out of the bottom to loosen it up. It was incredibly simple and easy to do, and I just placed the foam sheet right on top and popped the stabilizers in again. Now that the switch foam issue is fixed, I can finally place the plate and plate foam on top of the PCB to create my PCB sandwich. I align the standoffs with the corresponding holes, then use the included screws and my electric precision screwdriver to secure it all together. Here's how the PCB sandwich looks so far, but I have one more mod to add. I turned it over and placed the PCB foam on the underside, lining it up with the Hotswap sockets. I brought my case back out and placed the battery in as reference to see how the wire will be sitting, then used my scissors to cut a notch in the PCB foam to access the battery port. I won't be attaching the battery just yet, so I'll be placing the case and battery pack to the side for now. The next step will be to install my switches. For switches, I'll be using Alpaca linear switches that I purchased from Prime Keyboards. I used 205G0 to lube these and added film to each one too. These have a polycarbonate top housing with nylon bottom housings and palm stems. I've used these in a build in the past and really like them, so I can't wait to see how they perform in the Zoom65. As shown in the build assembly manual, I'll need to leave some of the switch sockets open in order to access the screw holes for the case later on. I went ahead and added the switches to the rest of the PCB in the meantime, and will finish adding the ones I'm leaving out after installing the PCB sandwich. I made sure to support the Hotswap socket from the back of the PCB as I inserted each switch. As I mentioned, I'm going with an ISO layout, but I'll also be going with the stepped caps lock option. This PCB also supports a split backspace and left shift, as well as a split spacebar. And here's how it looks after adding my switches. I brought the case back out and put the battery to the side again. It's time for me to add the aluminum weight to the bottom. I turned the case over, placed the weight into the designated space, then carefully held it in place as I turned the case over again. I secured the plate with the included screws. While I'm here, I'll go ahead and add the adhesive feet too. The kit comes with feet in black and white, so I went with white to match the keycaps and overall aesthetic. After that, I turned the case over again and used my electric precision screwdriver to remove the screws holding the case together. Next, I'll be adding the Poron gasket strips to the case where the recessed areas are. As you can see, there are 3 different sizes needed for these strips, which are all included. I found it a bit hard to pull up the strips from the sheets without ripping them, so I peeled off the backing first, which helped a lot. I ended up using my hands rather than the fine-tip tweezers to place each one on the case. After adding the gasket strips, I'll need to add the case foam. It comes in several pieces that fit right into the spaces in the bottom of the case. Because I'm adding in a battery pack, I won't need to add case foam in that spot. Instead, I went ahead and attached the battery to the PCB's battery port, placed the battery pack into the designated space, then placed the PCB sandwich into the bottom case, lining up the USB port with the cutout. To finally close the case, I placed the top of the case on top and added the screws back in to close everything up. Then I inserted the rest of the switches, being extra careful with applying pressure because I can no longer support the bottom of the PCB since the build is already closed up. It's now time to add the rotary knob. I went with the pink colorway that matches the weight. I placed it onto the knob stem and tightened the gem screw on the side of the knob with the included tool. And here's how the build looks so far before I add keycaps. Aside from the mistake of installing the switch foam layer out of order with the stabilizers, this build has gone pretty smooth so far, and I can't wait to see the finished result. I'm already loving the look of all the switches alongside the Alpaca themed TX stabs, and this board feels incredibly solid already. Now that the main part of the build is done, I can now put away my work mat. For keycaps, I'll be going with NicePBT Fuji, which is a set I purchased from Canon Keys a couple of months ago. These have die sub PBT alphas and mods with reverse die sub PBT accents. It has Hiragana legends and supports many layout types and features a cherry profile. As usual, the keycaps from Canon Keys are packaged really well, and even the box art looks great. Everything is contained in 3 trays, so I grabbed the top one and added all of my alphas first. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use this keycap set to fine-tune my stabilizer wires when I apply grease with my syringe. So before I jump into adding the modifiers, I want to go ahead and tackle this step. The kit I'm using is the stabilizer grease syringe kit from the Keycap company, which you can see more info about by visiting the link in the description. Don't forget that you can get 5% off of this kit by using my code MOCHI. I use a stem holder and one along each stabilizer, applying the grease and moving the slider up and down to help it spread around. I added the corresponding keycaps from the keycap set and fine-tuned the wires until I was happy with how the stabilizer sounded and felt. After that, I added the rest of the keycaps, including several of the included novelties. I'm pretty happy that I paired this keycap set with this case and the Alpaca switches because I really like how they all look together, and it's exactly what I was envisioning when I began planning this build many months ago. I especially love the soft cool tones, and the pink aluminum weight on the back also meshes very well with the overall theme. My first impression typing on this is that it feels and sounds incredible, and I actually didn't expect it to sound this stocky and solid in the end. Not only am I satisfied with the overall look, but this quickly has become one of my favorite builds this year simply because of how well the keyboard kit came together and the final result. Overall, I highly recommend the Zoom65, both if you're a beginner or an advanced enthusiast. The end result is just too good to miss out on, and despite there being a lot of materials and steps for the different mods, the detailed assembly booklet is extremely helpful. It's also not something that's normally included in keyboard kits, so picking up this kit as a beginner won't have you questioning how to begin or what order to go about doing things. While I do recommend having some experience assembling stabilizers or knowing the basics of how a keyboard is built before jumping into this, I still do think it's pretty straightforward despite the fact that I did accidentally skip a step. Still, a mistake like that isn't too complicated to fix, and I do know that there are resources online from the manufacturer on how to do certain steps like installing the battery or the weight. I also really enjoyed the included modifications with all the foam, and while many of those were optional, I went ahead and included all of them. If I do change my mind about it, many of these foam mods are only a few screws away from removal, but for now, I'm pretty happy with how they sound and feel. I know a lot of those aspects can be attributed to the switches and stabilizers as well, and I do know that's probably true here. I've always been a fan of Alpaca linear switches and their sound profile, and I've had many good experiences with TX stabs. This is a wonderfully thoughtful keyboard at a great price. As for the keycaps, NicePBT Fuji is another great budget keycap set from Canon Keys, and I love the dusky tones and high quality feeling of these. The legends are very crisp and the overall look was very well designed. Unfortunately, these are currently out of stock on their website, but I'll still leave a link to these down below. As for the keyboard kit itself, the Zoom65 Essential Edition was recently up for pre-order, and I'm unsure if they'll have another round of these, but I'll still leave a link to that as well. If you have the opportunity to get your hands on one of these, I highly recommend going for it. The case, weight, and knobs all come in many different color options, and pricing starts at just $159 USD. This was one of the builds I had planned for several months, and I'm glad I was finally able to work on it and share it with you all. I have more planned in the next few weeks, as well as a few mods and reviews, so if you like this video and would like to see more like it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thank you again to Wuku Studio for sponsoring this video, and thank you all for your support and for watching!